You have everything you worked for, yet it feels like you are losing. This is not a performance problem. It is a misalignment of your identity. You are winning a game you no longer want to play. Here is something I have noticed. After years of working privately with founders and executives, the people at the top rarely lack strategy. They have advisors, frameworks, playbooks. What they lack is accurate self knowledge. And that gap, the distance between what they know how to do and who they actually are underneath it all, that gap is where the real cost lives. So, in the next few minutes, I want to walk you through something specific. What actually causes the disconnect between external success and internal experience? Why the very drive that built your career is now the thing keeping you stuck? And what a real diagnostic looks like when you stop trying to optimize your way out of a problem that optimization created. This is not a motivational talk. Think of it more like a private briefing, something you would hear behind closed doors, not on a stage. Let us start with the paradox itself. On paper, everything is green. Revenue is up, the team is growing, people look at your life and assume you have it figured out. And yet internally, the experience is red. There is a persistent hum of dissatisfaction that does not match the scoreboard. Here is what most people assumed early in their career. They assumed that achievement would resolve the tension, that if they just hit the number, closed the deal, made the exit, the internal friction would finally settle. But it did not settle. It deepened, because the tension was never about the goal. It was about the person chasing it. I call this the successfully exhausted pattern. You are winning by every measure except the one that actually matters, which is how your life feels to live. And the strangest part is, you cannot even articulate what is wrong, because nothing is technically wrong. Everything is just off. That gap between looking successful and feeling successful is not a small thing. It is the most expensive gap in a high performer's life. So how did you get here? You got here because the engine that built your career is still running, except now it is running on autopilot. The drive that made you exceptional in your 20s and 30s, the relentless forward motion, the ability to push through anything, that drive was a gift. But gifts become liabilities when they operate without oversight. And at some point, your life shifted from being lived by intent to being lived by momentum. You stopped choosing. You started defaulting. The calendar filled itself. The obligations compounded. And the decisions you are making today are not really decisions at all. They are echoes of commitments you made 5, 10, 15 years ago. Here is the question that stops most high performers cold. Can you actually distinguish between genuine purpose and inherited obligation? Between the things you do because they align with who you are now, and the things you do because you said yes to them a decade ago and never revisited that choice? Most people cannot. And that inability is not a character flaw. It is the natural consequence of building a life at speed, without ever pulling over to check the map. Now, let us talk about what this costs biologically, because this is where it gets concrete. When you have been operating in high-pressure environments for years, your nervous system adapts. It recalibrates what it considers normal. And eventually, chronic stress stops registering as stress. It just becomes the baseline. You stop noticing the tension in your shoulders. You stop questioning why you wake up at 3 a.m. with your mind already running. You accept that this is just how it is, but here is the truth. Your fight or flight response was designed for actual threats, not for email, not for board meetings, not for the low-grade anxiety of managing 100 decisions a day. When that system stays activated constantly, it extracts a tax. Decision fatigue compounds. Sleep architecture breaks down. Your capacity to think clearly, to feel clearly, to be present in any meaningful way, it compresses. And the worst part is, you are so accustomed to performing under these conditions that you do not even realize how much bandwidth you have lost. You are operating at 60% and calling it normal. That is the nervous system tax. And you have been paying it for years. So, what do most people do when they feel this way? They reach for more strategy, another framework, another advisor, a new productivity system, a 360 review. And I am not saying those tools are useless. They are not, but they are solving the wrong layer of the problem. Imagine you are building a house and the foundation is cracked. You can redesign the kitchen all you want. You can upgrade the windows, repaint every room. But until you address the foundation, every improvement is temporary. That is what is happening here. The problem is upstream of tactics. It sits at the identity layer. It is not about what you are doing. It is about who you are doing it as. And no amount of strategic refinement will close a gap that exists at the level of self-knowledge. Forcing harder, grinding longer, optimizing more aggressively, that is the most expensive option available to you right now. Not because it does not produce results. It does, but because every result it produces costs you more than it should, and takes you further from the life that would actually fit. This brings us to the core issue: identity versus role. Most high performers fused their identity with their role years ago. They did not do it consciously. It happened gradually. You became the founder, the CEO, the one who handles everything. And that fusion worked for a long time because the role demanded everything you had and you were willing to give it. But here is the problem. When the role shifts, when you exit, when you scale, when the company outgrows the version of you that started it, the person underneath has no blueprint. There is no separate self waiting in the wings. There is just the role, and when the role changes, it feels like you are disappearing. This is why so many founders struggle after a successful exit. This is why executives who finally get the promotion they wanted feel emptier than before. The achievement exposed something they were not prepared for. Underneath the title, underneath the accomplishments, they are not sure who is actually there. Distinguishing who you are from what you built is not a philosophical exercise. It is the most practical work a high performer can do. Because until you make that distinction, every decision you make is filtered through a version of yourself that may no longer be accurate. So, what does the actual work look like? It starts with what I call human due diligence. In business, before you acquire a company, you run diligence. You look at the real numbers, the real liabilities, the real operating conditions, not the pitch deck, not the aspirational projections. The actual state of things. Human due diligence is the same principle applied to you. It is a structured reading of your actual wiring, not your aspirations. Not your goals, not what you think you should want, but how you are actually built, where you are operating at your best, and where you are hemorrhaging energy without realizing it. The first layer is what I call operating system first. Before we change direction, before we redesign the life, we fix the foundations: sleep, stress response, signal, clarity. Because if your nervous system is dysregulated, if your decision-making hardware is compromised, any strategy you build on top of it will be distorted. The second layer is design over default. Once the signal is clean, once you can actually hear yourself think without the noise of chronic stress and inherited obligation, then you make decisions about direction. Not reactive decisions, not panic pivots, intentional, clear-eyed choices about what the next chapter looks like, built from who you actually are, not from who you were 10 years ago. When this work is done well, the shift is not dramatic from the outside, but internally it is unmistakable. Decisions become lighter. The friction that used to accompany every major choice drops dramatically. Not because the decisions are easier, but because they are being made by someone who actually knows what they want. Energy reallocates. Instead of spending 70% of your bandwidth forcing outcomes and managing internal resistance, that energy moves toward building, toward creating, toward the work that actually matters to you. The difference in output is remarkable, not because you are working harder, but because you are no longer working against yourself. And perhaps the most significant change: the next 10 years stop being an extension of the last 10. They become something you actually chose, something designed with intention and clarity, rather than something you stumbled into because the momentum carried you there. That is what it looks like when the life finally fits. Not a smaller life, not a less ambitious life, a life that is actually yours. If what I described in this video matches your experience, know this. The gap will not close on its own. Momentum does not self-correct. If you want to explore what a private diagnostic conversation looks like, the link is in the description. Stop optimizing a life that was never designed for you.